So when I'm actually coaching, we're developing these plans before we actually start to do the work of actually taking those actions and creating the discomfort, saying in that moment, acknowledge it when you get uncomfortable. Acknowledge it and say thank you. Whatever that thank you is. I'm beating myself up because I was fearful of what I was going to say from a communication standpoint.
Yeah.
Or my environment or people are trying to put me in a box that I've always played, but that's not the box I want to be in. So now I'm reacting in an angry place. Or I'm finding conflict with my coworkers because of what their strategy impacts my strategy. Or I'm afraid of the judgment. It's catching ourselves and being present and saying thank you, just by yourself. And as the conversation and context evolves, changing our language, changing our thought processes. And if in that moment we can't do that, even excusing ourselves, because there's nothing wrong with that. It's just taking a moment.
Yeah.
And putting ourselves on pause and not getting caught in that reaction. In that, from a planning standpoint, we can better, emotionally and behaviorally, better respond than react to situations that come up when they pressure us to get us back into the box that we're not trying to play in.
Yeah, I like how you said kind of respond versus react. And I also, my takeaway from what you just said there was, those strong emotions can not always, but a lot of times indicate that it's an old narrative or it's other things that are coming to play. Because you're feeling angry or afraid or whatever happens to be, something's getting triggered there. And rather than letting it take over and grab the steering wheel, just pause, acknowledge, thank them for being on the journey with you, but keep them in the passenger seat, not the driver's seat. I think that's great. So my conversation today, we're going to talk about a word that I think we'd all be very familiar with, but a really important and powerful word. We're going to talk about intention. And we're going to talk about really setting intention to change your life, change your story, even change the actions and behaviors that you take on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So to join us on this conversation, we've got Dr. Ian Brooks. He's the CEO and founder of Rhodes Smith Consulting. He has a book out, and his book is actually called Intention, Building Capabilities to Transform Your Story. So the conversation with Ian is going to be a great conversation for you and for all of us, just to get you thinking a little bit about really who are you, what's really formed your story and who you are, and is that really who you are, and do you need to make some changes to that? And if so, he outlines a nice process for us to take to make the change and then ultimately make it sustainable. So listen real close, and then of course join me at the very end when I share with you my notes.
The Workplace Therapist Show is sponsored by the Leadership Foundry. Bringing a cutting-edge, real-world approach to leadership development, the Leadership Foundry partners with each client organization to create a custom-tailored experience, virtual or in person, that combines innovative leadership content, world-class facilitators, and one-on-one coaching to ensure your leaders have everything they need to grow and thrive. To find out more and to design your one-of-a-kind program, visit myleadershipfoundry.com.
Ian, I am so thrilled to have you on the show today. I'm really excited for our conversation today and the different paths it might take, and to talk some about your book. But before we kind of jump into our conversation, for my listeners, share a little bit about you. What do you do today, and how did you get there?
Oh, sure. And thank you, Brandon. Welcome, everyone who's listening, and pleasure to be here. As Brandon mentioned, I'm Dr. Ian D. Brooks. I have a PhD in industrial organization psychology, but I originally started my career in clinical psychology. Since I was 13, I always wanted to be a psychologist because I was always curious around why people did what they did.
Yeah.
And so it took me on a journey and path of exploration of psychology, first starting off with adolescents and then working with adults. And it took me, at my first stop, taking my master's in clinical psychology and having the opportunity to work in a 24-hour lockdown ward. So as you can imagine, getting people straight off the street or brought in by police or brought in by their families, all seeking help. And it was an amazing experience being able to help people in a way that where they were vulnerable, but also not necessarily by choice, and really establishing what impacted them and their ability, both from a mental and chemical imbalance perspective, but also how it reintegrated them back into society. After several years of doing that, I was like, well, I'm going to work with some higher functioning people. So I made the jump into getting my doctorate and having the opportunity to work and coach people both in organizations and one-on-one, just around how to be better. Because one thing that we all want to do is be better. And that's where my life journey has really taken me, working with some high-level organizations, to just startups, to just people just wanting to do something different. Because that's one thing and one common narrative that we all have. And so it's been a wonderful experience being able to afford my time to give back, but also care for people who are looking to take a next step in their journeys.
Yeah, I didn't know that part about your journey, that you started early on with the clinical side and you actually had worked inpatient. Very similar to my background. I did exactly the same thing you did.
Okay.
So I'm sure we could swap lots of stories sometime.
Yes. I don't know what your transition and pivot point was, but I think mine revolved around having to wash a grown man because he couldn't do it himself safely. And I was like, you know what? I think I need to make some transitions to work with different people at that moment.
Yeah, we had back when I was at Ridgeview. They're like begging me, don't tell some of those stories, Brandon. Don't tell some of those stories. But you did have regularly code. You had codes where you had to take people and you had to secure them so they couldn't hurt themselves. Yes. And that was always something you always had to be on the lookout for and watch for.
Absolutely. It's always patient first and patient care and do what's right, while also not doing harm to themselves as well. And that can be a slippery slope in certain respects, trying to do what's right. And when they may be out of their own facilities, both mind and body, as such, it's a very unique experience to say the least, but one that I found very rewarding. Yeah, to say the least.
Agreed. And in that group of folks, you're concerned about them either hurting themselves or others, and so then you move from there to, well, let's go to higher functioning folks that's not our primary concern. Let's help them get better. And I love that. Like, how do I help the folks that I'm working with get better, whatever better kind of means.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit about your book. So your book is Intention: Building Capabilities to Transform Your Story. First, tell me a little bit about what went into that. What prompted you to write the book?
Sure. Great question. And, I think we all have an idea of how we can help other people, especially in the genre and self-help and just caring that you and I come from, and many of your listeners may be attracted to as well. For me, when I was doing my coaching, I found a common narrative that people are struggling with some of the same aspects of how to change. Not about what, because people have a measure of, especially in the corporate space, on what the goals should be. We're always defined by the carrot. That could be a new job title, new money, validation. In the social world, that might be the likes that we get on Instagram and Twitter. But we struggle with how to go about it and making sure that it's life-changing and life-sustaining. So I started just by documenting, what do I see the biggest challenges from my various clients that I've been working with? And then I sat back and said, what themes do I see? What's resonating? What's working? Potentially, where do they struggle? And then also, where can I offer my own perspective and voice? Knowing that self-help is an opportunity to really give back and offer a perspective when people are ready to listen to it and being open to that voice. And so from that journey, I started writing the book and building it out in a way that can offer a guide and guiding principles in particular around specific questions that offer insight into who people are and what they want, so that we don't detach ourselves from situations or pretend that our histories and what we bring to the table, that they don't exist, because quite frankly, they do. So intention was about bringing depth to a conversation and to action that then drives planning and as well, and more important, sustainment as we look at it from a long-term perspective.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to go back to something you said earlier in there. You said what started you down this path was you were noticing and listening to themes. What were some of the themes that you noticed, patterns?
Sure. Two major themes came up. One of the first things was we always start with the end in mind. So people were struggling with, how do I sustain this? Or I didn't sustain it. I said, okay, that's great. So the theme was, how did you integrate this into your life? What concessions did you make? In that context, it got me thinking, okay, if sustainment is at the end, well, where did we start from? Let's backtrack. Okay, you did some reflection, you thought about this, you built a plan. Oh, that's great. Well, what choices did you make? What was your anchor of success? What and who did you bring to the table from your own characters, of your personality? As important, what did you see that you thought needed changing, but really were solving for something else? And so from that dialogue, it was, okay, the end goal is sustainment. Also, the biggest gap was, do you know who you are? And so in my book, I start off in particular around discovery of what you're looking to solve for, acknowledging that what you think is your challenge, there's a lot more context that surrounds that. Secondly, and aligned to that, is the principle of you. Do you know who you are? What choices are you willing to make now that you understand and acknowledge the true goal and priority that you've set? I think that's where some of the biggest challenges that people really had, because they didn't acknowledge their own voice, their own characters, their own decisions around a goal that may or may not have been the right goal. They were just only looking for an end result, not the path to sustainment. Thus, they were never going to be successful in their sustainment of the new behaviors, and in particular, capabilities that are transferable across any situation, not just this particular one.
Yeah, okay. So it's a simple question, but a very hard question to answer. The profound one is the question of, so who are you?
Yes.
So how do you, for people listening, what's a starting place with that question? What's something they can start to think about that might get them to truly see themselves for who they really are?
Yeah, it is a very profound one that is a very simple question, but your statement is extremely hard, because we often define who we are by what's around us, not the authenticity that we bring to the table. In that regard, and I talk about it in the book, we start off with acknowledging that who we are is like a grain of sand, and what we're bringing to the table is nothing more than a grain of sand. That grain of sand on a baby's finger looks huge, or under a microscope, huge. But in the context of, in and of itself, it's just a grain of sand. Now you put all those grains of sand together, guess what you have? You have a mound. Now in the context of change and transformation of who we are, we don't know if that mound is sitting on the Caribbean, sipping on a Mai Tai, or we're in the middle of the desert, the middle of nowhere, no water.
Yeah.
In that context, when we are acknowledging who we are and how someone goes about it, it starts with, first, if we have to get deep, we have to now explore our own decisions. First and foremost, our environment. So the people, places, and things that surround us. What's reinforcing our behaviors, our actions? What's reinforcing even our discomforts and our need to change and desire to change? Secondly, who am I as a person? So I talk about it in the context of characters. We all have characters in our life. Now, characters in particular are not, I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm a uncle, I'm a VP. Those are job titles prescribed to us. When I'm looking at characters and describing characters, I'm looking in the context of what am I bringing to the table based off of previous decisions I've made and reactions to the world. That takes the form of, and I describe it in the book, that could be the abominable snowman, right? That whole character from Bugs Bunny, and all he wanted was a pet rabbit. And here was Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny trying to find, Pismo Beach, and quite frankly, they end up in the North Pole. And quite frankly, the abominable snowman just wanted to just love and care for the rabbit, yet he was actually killing the rabbit because he was squeezing him so tight. Sometimes that's our character and how we represent, because we want something so much that we actually are killing ourselves or killing the actual idea of what we want to achieve and detracting from our goal. For myself, it's like, oh, I'm Mr. Degree. I need a degree to validate everything that I have, to demonstrate that I'm smart enough, that I'm good enough, that I have the validation. Yet it detracts, not to say those degrees are bad, but sometimes detracts from what our ultimate goal is and what we're trying to achieve. And all of these characters within ourselves, once acknowledged, no different than that grain of sand, lets us know what's going to influence us and our decisions as we look to build plans moving forward on anything that we're looking to change.
So it's kind of like, I've been hearing you talk, it's where, and there's no, we're all messy people. So there's no right or wrong answer to this, but where does self-worth really lie for you? Is it based on external things like titles and degrees and money and all those kind of things? Or is it based on kind of truly knowing yourself and having a sense of identity and purpose and all those things? And as I said, we're messy folks, so it's always going to be a combination, right? I always find myself sometimes slipping into one or the other. So having a little bit of that, but can kind of answering those questions. So now let's fast forward a little bit. Let's say we're moving down the process in a healthy way. We're starting to see ourselves differently, and we've had an aha. It's like, oh my gosh, like I've been chasing these carrots, or I've been squeezing the rabbit too tight, or whatever it happens to be, and I want something different. And I figured that out. Wow, what's my first step? How do you start that process?
I think the first thing to say is congratulations, right? Because you've already gone through the first step.
Patting myself on the back.
Acknowledgement. You've already now become, that doesn't mean that can't change of who you are and while you've acknowledged that, because that could be of time and place. But what it does mean is that you're present. In that context, now that you're present and recognize who you are and what you're bringing to the table, and coupling that with your priority of what you want to achieve, I now can combine that to, now I can build a plan to say, this is who I am. Now I understand what my priority is from an achievement standpoint and behaviors in particular to now build around. So now when I start building a plan, again, we're just thinking about it right now. We're not even taking any literal action, so to speak. We're taking mental actions.
Right.
Now I can start to say, you know what? Who am I? What am I willing to do? What time frame? So thinking about this from a 2-year standpoint, or a 1-year standpoint, not what do I want to achieve tomorrow or in one instance. What baby steps can I start taking in my day-to-day life to start becoming the person from a behavior standpoint, agnostic of end result, other than saying that you did it? What baby steps can I start taking to integrate those behaviors in my life in a consistent basis?
Yeah.
Now, and that's a balance, right? Because we live in a right now society, right now world. I need it right now. But sadly, we have replaced, or I want it now. Let me say that more in particular. Our I wants replace our I needs. I need a job. I need to breathe. I need to eat, right? You want a nice car. You want a nice job. You want to feel safe. Those wants change all the time. And I think the last year has demonstrated how much our I wants were replaced by our I needs. And that's where you saw people slowing down a little bit, creating more intentional focus. And as such, as we go down this journey of transformation, and as I coach my leaders and individuals, it is a conversation of what do you truly need and minimizing as much noise as possible. And when you build your plan and build specific behaviors, acknowledging what you're going to start doing, as well as what you're going to start to let go.
Okay, I'm so glad you did that, because that's a great segue to where I want to take this.
Sure.
So you opened up by saying, which I thought was so very true, kind of who we are is kind of based on kind of where our context, like where we're at, the people around us, right? Mm-hmm. So if I now decide I want to be somebody else, or I'm really deep down somebody else, it might mean I need to change my surroundings.
Absolutely.
Like I might have to let go of some relationships, or move, for example, or do something that's more of in the category of stop doing, right? I want to get rid of these things. That seems like that would be kind of hard and scary.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
How do you kind of coach folks to get more comfortable with that? Because that can be hard.
It is, and you see me smiling, right? Because that's where the excitement comes in. That tells me that's exactly where we need to be. Because if it was easy, everyone would have done it already. They would have already done it already. I coach people to say we need to acknowledge where we are and being in tune with our bodies, in tune with our emotions, because it is scary. We are putting ourselves in a vulnerable position. But as you described, our environment has is surrounded by those people or places or things that keep us in a safe place. They're based on an old narrative. Now, it's not to say that our environment, be it people, places, or things, are bad. We may need to adjust what they represent in our lives and creating new templates and ideas and informing now where we need to go and creating new relationships with each potentially as we move forward. In those moments, we can be, as we're conscious about it, we can make quick decisions. But as I coach my employees and people individually, I have them say, when you're in that moment, catch yourself. Acknowledge that emotion and fear. Say, this is where I need to be. That this emotion, while daunting, and I'm getting feedback that is trying to force me back into the place where it feels comfortable, now it's creating a discomfort for me. Acknowledge that this is the place where you should be from an emotional standpoint. Take a breath. And now let's get back to our plan. Oftentimes, and I want to be very clear about this, oftentimes we're fraught with making decisions around planning and this discomfort right when we're in the middle of it. We're reacting at that point because we don't know how to deal with it emotionally. We haven't thought through. We just thought through, hey, I just want to get to this result. Tell me how to do it. I'll check the boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm done. We're not taught how to deal with this emotionally because guess what we're describing right now to your question? That's fear. That's an emotion. That's a vulnerability. Yet you give anybody the 5 whys on what to do. Guess what? That's also all behavior pieces. We're not taught how to handle this emotionally. To say, I'm in the middle of this. It's when those moments of, oh, poop.
Yeah.
What do I do now? Because of that fear, because we want to be liked, because we want to be safe, because this is what I've been always taught to do, or better yet, this is what I've always done. This doesn't feel comfortable. So when I'm actually coaching, we're developing these plans before we actually start to do the work of actually taking those actions and creating the discomfort, saying in that moment, acknowledge it when you get uncomfortable. Acknowledge it and say thank you. Whatever that thank you is, of I'm beating myself up because I was fearful of what I was going to say from a communication standpoint.
Yeah.
Or my environment or people are trying to put me in a box that I've always played, but that's not the box I want to be in. So now I'm reacting in an angry place. Or I'm finding conflict with my coworkers because of what their strategy impacts my strategy. Or I'm afraid of the judgment. It's catching ourselves and being present and saying thank you, just by yourself. And as the conversation and context evolves, changing our language, changing our thought processes. And if in that moment we can't do that, even excusing ourselves, because there's nothing wrong with that. It's just taking a moment.
Yeah.
And putting ourselves on pause and not getting caught in that reaction. In that, from a planning standpoint, we can better, emotionally and behaviorally, better respond than react to situations that come up when they pressure us to get us back into the box that we're not trying to play in.
Yeah, I like how you said kind of respond versus react. And I also, my takeaway from what you just said there was, those strong emotions can not always, but a lot of times indicate that it's an old narrative or it's other things that are coming to play. Because you're feeling angry or afraid or whatever happens to be, something's getting triggered there. And rather than letting it take over and grab the steering wheel, just pause, acknowledge, thank them for being on the journey with you, but keep them in the passenger seat, not the driver's seat. I think that's great. So I think that's really good. I want to follow us down the process because we were getting down to the other theme that you mentioned, which was sustainability. So you've outlined really well for us some steps to get us to start to change. But then you mentioned a lot of folks you talk to, they say, I couldn't keep it going. Like I couldn't hold on to it. So what are some ways that we buffer ourselves, protect ourselves, make it sustainable?
Yeah, a great question. I think it starts with first acknowledging how are we defining success? Often we define success based off of an end goal of here's my title, here's what I should be doing, and here's how people should see me, versus our behaviors, agnostic of what anyone else might see or feel. It's what am I consistently doing over time? What situations is this presented in? And creating new situations of which I'm extending and changing the dialogue around the same behaviors. As we build our behaviors around, or our goals around behaviors versus simply outcomes or targeted actions, we can now integrate it into our lives to the extent that as we think about behaviors of communication, how can I build this into the fabric of my office as well as the fabric of my personal life outside of the office? Engagement, or clearly articulating a strategy, being a better partner, demonstrating influence, dealing with my feelings of being overwhelmed. It's thinking about sustainment in the guise of behaviors that are incrementally built over time. Because we didn't just arrive here today. It took time to build up. Expertise is built over time in experience, in different situations. As such, our behaviors, truly our capabilities of being able to transform and address an immediate need, as well as transferring those skills to other areas of our life, take experience and time, and really thinking about it and building it into the fabric of who we are in our day-to-days. So it requires us to be conscious about what we're doing, conscious about what we are not doing, as well as taking stock on the behaviors that are working and are not. And with that recipe, we can then build out sustainment from a behavior standpoint and one that's less anchored on a particular outcome.
I love that. I love that you kind of focused it on the behaviors and not just the outcome. And immediately made me think about kind of going to the gym, right? That's a behavior. Now maybe my goal is to bench press a certain amount or achieve some other kind of physical metric, but really what I should be focusing on more is, so how many days of the week am I going to go to the gym or to my Orange Theory classes, and what's that going to look like, and creating more of that structure and routine. So the good news with exercise is that's pretty easy to do because there's gyms you can join, there's there's fitness clubs you can be a member of, and they have classes you can sign up for that.
Right.
The problem with us is there's not always classes for some of the other things that live up in our head.
Yeah.
So what are some other tips that you might have or you've coached your clients on to help build in behaviors to help them maintain those shifts?
Yeah. One of the things I do when we're building out a plan, I meet with my clients every week based on their plan and saying, great, let's acknowledge what you did last week. How did it feel? How did it go? In our meeting, I ended always by saying, what are we now going to focus on this week behaviorally? And what situations are you going to exercise those behaviors? Being very clear. Sometimes to your acknowledgement, it's easy. Oh, I'm just going to go to the gym. That's my anchor point. I am now going to go 3 times this week, and this is what I'm going to do during that 30 minutes that I'm there. From a corporate standpoint, I look for meetings. If there are no meetings or if there's no already pre-made instances, then we create them. Say, all right, whom are you going to reach out to? Who are you going to schedule time with? How are you going to communicate? And it obviously depends upon what goals we're trying to achieve. Sometimes it's more strategic. Sometimes it's more just behavioral. But we identify things within that week that they're actually going to take action in specific points. We're not trying to boil the ocean. All we're trying to do is identify throughout the week, where can they now institute these new behaviors, both in a work environment or potentially in their personal lives. So if there isn't something in the work environment, as one example, I was working with one coach, she was overwhelmed. I said, well, how can you take this in your own personal life and working with your husband and working with your children? What does that now mean? What does that now feel and look like? And how are you going to see the progress measured by your actions, less so about a particular outcome that I was there at the gym for 30 minutes or I feel less, I'm looking more for, I feel less overwhelmed. What does that mean with you and your husband? Now in the work environment, what might that mean? Let's pick a few instances where you can try this out, both from action, but also from the emotion standpoint. How did that feel? Did that feel right?
Yeah.
How did it transpire? Was it successful? Not in, yeah, I did it, but, or that it worked all the way, because failure could be success as well. It is, what felt right, and can you build on that? Build on that being your behavior. And instituting and identifying specific actions throughout the week is extremely important, so that you're very intentional about what you're doing, so you can think about it, plan for it, physically and emotionally as you move forward.
Yeah, I think what I love about what you said and as you were giving different examples, you kept coming back to the same phrase, and you almost kept opening with it, which was, how do you feel? How do you feel? And you almost use that as the first opening metric, because I think we tend to push that aside, but you're reminding people, start with that. How do you feel? And then we use that to gauge kind of how we're going to move. And it's reminding people to be aware of that, so they don't just push it down and push it away.
Absolutely. It's a phrase I use quite often. It's like, when you read something, how's that feel? Does that feel right? It doesn't mean it's perfect, but does it feel right?
Yeah.
And when you get people to anchor on that, we can always check and adjust later.
Yeah.
Right? No one's going to be a judge in some way, shape, or form, especially when we actually put our new selves out into the world. It will always offer us feedback.
Yeah.
But it has to start with you. Does this feel right? And did you come from an authentic place? One from being mindful of who you are, in a place that you considered your plan and where you wanted to go.
Yeah.
And from that context, you're going to be more right than you are wrong.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I ask all my guests this question towards the end of our time together.
Sure.
What's one life hack you have for us for how we can have either better conversations or healthier relationships, either at work or at home?
Yeah, there's a lot of life hacks, and I think it depends upon who you ask and when you ask. But for me, it is around purpose. Do you know who you are, and are you acting with the same purpose, both in an authentic way as you move forward? As we think about it from a communication standpoint, as I work with the leaders and individuals in their own personal lives around just communicating, are we come from our true self, where we're trying to really communicate a message that shows partnership, that shows that I know you and I want to work with you? It comes from a place of both our words, but also our emotions. Of when our emotions become now anxiety ridden, or our words become detrimental, degrading, that demonstrates a place of fear. It demonstrates places of non-collaboration. If we can be authentic with ourselves in our own path and our own truth in working with someone and interacting from a communication standpoint, we want to do what's right for both of us. That does not equate to that we're always going to agree. It does show care, and it does offer respect. So being that authentic self and owning that voice is extremely important.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And what I like the way you said it too was that getting that sense of purpose, that authenticity. If we're true to ourselves, we're gonna throw less elbows. Because we're not going to be so grabby for things. Like, we're not going to be looking at the world as like a scarce resource. Like, well, he's got the promotion or she's got that raise. We're going to be more true to who we are, and it's going to manifest in just healthier conversations. That's great.
Absolutely.
Well, Ian, this has been great. So if people want to learn more about you, buy a copy of your book, where can they go?
Sure. They can reach out to me through my website. It's at rhodessmith.com. That's RHODSSMITH. On that website, they can find my book, which is actually housed on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. An audiobook is forthcoming.
Nice.
Also on that site, they can see various write-ups of the book and different reviews in different magazine script write-ups as well. On a more regular basis, I do post on Twitter and Instagram under the handle Dr. B_intention.
Nice. Excellent. Well, thank you for this conversation. Great set of ideas and tips and ways for us to start to rewrite our story in a very intentional way, which I know is what your book is all about and what you're all about. So Thank you for the gift that is you. And I really, really appreciate your time today.
No, thank you, Brandon. Pleasure to be here and great conversation.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I took some notes on some of the big themes that came out of it. And so I want to summarize that because Ian talked about a lot of different ideas and concepts, and there was a lot of practical little nuggets in there. So first, he mentioned that there were two big themes that folks tend to struggle with, and I totally agree with him. First of all, do you really truly know who you are? In other words, we could define that as, are you chasing the right things? Do you know what matters to you in life, who you really truly are and want to be, or are you following someone else's script? So that was our first question. The second one was, once we make changes to go down a different path, if that's where we want to go, how do we make that sustainable? So let's go down the first question first. So when we talked about who you are, he made a really important point. He said, who you are is largely defined by the people, places, kind of the context around you. Right? If we're surrounding ourselves with people that care a lot about titles and money, then that's what's going to matter to us. So getting our sense of kind of what are the voices around us that have kind of informed who we are. And then if we want to make a change, start by making a plan. What's our kind of 1 to 3 year plan? What are steps that you can take and be really clear on what you need versus what you want? And then ultimately, we've got to get to the really scary place, which is, and what are the stuff that we're going to let go? How are we going to let go of things, and what are those things? And that's the hardest part. Whether it's behaviors that we stop doing or relationships that we decide are no longer going to help us get to where we want to go. And he mentioned a lot of that stuff, it's not bad that we had it. It was probably there to help protect us, but it might be time to move on from that. And then finally, in terms of keeping it sustainable, he talked about something that I've heard other guests on my podcast this year talk about, which was focus on the behaviors and not about the outcomes. Behaviors and not about the outcomes. So really getting us clear on the behaviors that we're trying to put in place, whether that's going to the gym regularly or having the meetings with those people in your work team you need to have more often, or a date night with your spouse or significant other, and then constantly checking in and saying, how am I feeling as your gauge. So I think he offers some great approaches for us to help us make some changes. I hope you heard some nuggets in there that can help you, and I would love to hear the changes that you're making as you move from 2021 into the next year and hopefully something closer to normal.
Hey everyone, it's Aaron Smith, Assistant to the Creative Director and Junior Workplace Therapist. I wanted to take a minute to say thank you to all of those of you who have left a comment or a review for the podcast. It means so much and gives us great feedback about how we can improve the show so we can bring great content to help you in your daily life, at work, and beyond. This summer, we're on a quest to grow our number of reviews so that way we can climb the podcast ladder. In order to entice you to write one, we're giving away an Amazon gift card after every episode in June and July. So please, write a review, leave us some stars, and if we choose yours to read on the podcast, we'll send you an Amazon gift card. Who doesn't want something fun from Amazon? Just in case you're wondering what to write, here's a great example from Tommy WC, who left us 5 stars and wrote, Brandon's podcast is insightful and informative. Great content and great guests. Thanks for a great review, Tommy, and thank you for listening.